What an honor to be here tonight. Thank you all so much. I love coming to Colorado. I don't know how many of you all in your life, you suddenly stop and realize, if you've traveled, it's like, wow, I've been to this state so many times. And this is one of those moments where I have done so much work in Colorado over the years. I did a little inventory today, and it's like, dude, I spoke at on behalf of rural philanthropy with the Colorado Nonprofit Associations up in Steamboat Springs. I drove there late at night, and the guy who rented the car said, please don't hit an elk. And I kind of laughed, and he's like, dude, I'm serious, don't hit an elk. But I've worked with the Women's Bean Project. Do you all know that? One of the first social enterprises, the Rocky Mountain Microfinance, which has done breakthrough work. Mayor Hickenlooper was the first mayor in America to recognize the amazing potential of the nonprofit sector and organized his basically Center for Community Partnerships, which, and again, Desa West, a young woman he put in charge of it, the idea that nonprofits in Denver were major sources of outside investment dollars. And through that Office of Strategic Partnerships, they brought $50 million of new money into Denver by helping nonprofits get grants. You know, I spoke at the Aspen Institute multiple times. In fact, one of my favorite moments in the joy of drinking tequila, I went to a bar downtown in Aspen and I ordered some tequila, and this kid slided up next to me and we started talking. He's like, why are you here? It's like, well, I'm here to speak at the Aspen Institute, but I'm really here to go out to Woody Creek to pay homage to Hunter S. Thompson. And I ended up going home that night with an original Hunter S. Thompson for Sheriff poster, which dutifully hangs on my wall to this very day. And you know it's real love when your wife says, not only can you buy it, but you can hang it on our living room wall. But I've really enjoyed coming here. But I'm also happy because it's my second time in Golden. I was here 42 years ago with my then newlywed wife, and we visited so many different places. But it's interesting because I live in a tiny little town in rural New Mexico now, Cerrillos, right outside Santa Fe. And I was intrigued with the mining college here, because Cerrillos is home to the oldest Paleolithic mine in North America. Turquoise was mined in the year 600. Yeah, right outside Mount Chichahuitl, right outside our back door. But mostly I'm excited to be here tonight because it's very poignant for me. Yesterday was January 20th, Inauguration Day, and the DC Central Kitchen was born 37 years ago when I was a young ex-nightclub manager, and I had this idea for DC Kitchen. And being a showman at heart, I recognized the real power of the symbolism of food from the inauguration being donated and going to shelters and charities or to people who are outside on the street. And to my great fortune, the Bush inauguration people got it 1, 2, 3. As you may remember, there was a lot of talk during that election of points of light, which left most Americans scratching their head. What's a point of light? So when I suggested that this would be a great opportunity for President-elect Bush to demonstrate his commitment by making sure food was not wasted at the end of the night, they jumped on it, like they say, like a chicken on a June bug. And the kitchen was born, and 37 years ago today, the day after, I was surrounded by media. What media outlet in the world, when you think about it, could resist food from the inaugurations going out the next day to make sure people were fed on the streets and shelters of Washington, D.C. So the D.C. Central Kitchen was born, and it's always poignant for me. I am retired now, and I am a proud founder of an organization that has now seen itself replicated hundreds of times. But just so you know, before we get started here, I'm not a big old fancy pants. I didn't go to college. I was a high school. I barely graduated high school. I'm the kid who took high in high school, literally. It was a different era. And who could believe it's all legal now? If you went back in time, I never would have ever believed it. But I was born and raised at a time, and in fact, my pop was a Marine Corps pilot. And so I grew up on Marine Corps bases, and he was a naval aviator, so I grew up in Southern California. And when we eventually moved to Washington, D.C., or at least my pop told us we were moving to Washington, D.C., we ended up in Springfield, Virginia, which was a real letdown for a kid on the cusp of his teen years who dreamed of hanging 10 on the beaches of Malibu and suddenly was in It was like the Beverly Hillbillies in reverse. And my mom sat me down and said, one of my favorite movies is on, let's watch together, because I was depressed. And it was Casablanca. And that movie changed my life because I was just so intrigued by the movie itself, which is just still a joyful movie to watch. But there's the great scene where you first see Rick's, and everybody's kind of pouring into Rick's. And you could tell that Rick's didn't have to advertise. Rick's was just Rick's. But, and you'll remember if next time you see the movie, watch this. It's a great tracking shot. As you kind of get yourself aware of what's going on, and the camera kind of weaves through the customers of Rick's, and it's all these different people, and they're whispering and talking, and there's two guys speaking what I have to think is Mandarin Chinese. I'm looking at my good friend Joe because we shared a lot of conversation about China earlier, and you can tell everyone's talking about how am I going to escape Casablanca. So I suddenly realized, and this was really kind of a eureka moment, that Rick's was not a nightclub. It functioned like a nightclub. Everybody went there because, again, you had Sam and his orchestra, you had Carl the waiter, you had Sasha the bartender, you had the gambling in the back, but it was escape hatch. It was where everybody went to figure out, how do I escape the drudgery of the life of a refugee? They're all trying to flee, and their world is in shambles behind them, and they're all trying to make it to the glorious freedom of America. So that intrigued me, the duality of two things, the Trojan horse that Rick's really was. It was disguised as a nightclub, but its function was to really offer people a place to come, meet, and plot to escape to a new future. That really intrigued me. So literally, much to my Marine Corps father's chagrin, as his firstborn son said, I don't need to go to college, Pop. I'm going to open a nightclub. And honestly, that's all I wanted to do, and I'm serious, I really wanted to do this. Because as a young man also, and I'm looking around the audience, I know we're all from a very similar generation, we all saw John Kennedy, Martin Luther King. I was 10 in 1968 when Dr. King in March and then Bobby Kennedy in June were murdered. And there was a sense of, as a young kid, that really struck me as, why? I mean, they were young men. At the time when I was young, they looked like grown adults, and they were, but they were 38, 39, they were young men. And they were murdered for talking about what it could be like if our country could see past race, gender, class, background, and find common cause in making the world a better place. To a young kid, it's like, sign me up. So I couldn't figure out why, but I also felt like those things had to somehow carry on. And at the same time, and I know many of you all will remember, it was a glorious age of variety shows. Ed Sullivan, Carol Burnett, Flip Wilson, all these groups, and how much comedy, Smothers Brothers, how much comedy and music and theater disguised political ideas. The idea that, again, that you had to keep these ideas going, but you had to disguise them so that people weren't afraid. I'm going to fast forward a little bit, and I apologize in advance for the crass nature of this next comment I'm going to make, but years ago, I got this little heart tattooed on my finger because it's so tempting at times to do this. And it's like, don't be a hater. You'll never, ever convince people to see a new path by badgering or hectoring them. But sometimes you have to understand that most people are afraid. Most people in America are decent, kind people, they're afraid. So I've always said I've never been in the nonprofit business, I'm in the bravery business. That's my job, is to make people brave. But sometimes you have to disguise new ideas. And to my young heart, I felt like a nightclub could do that in the nation's capital. Can you imagine? A purposeful nightclub that was going to disguise big, important, bold ideas as comedy, art, theater, dance. So that's what I worked for. And I put every ounce of my young man's fervor into learning every aspect of what it took to run a nightclub. Anybody here worked in service in your life? Anybody here waited on tables? I knew I liked you. I love everybody. Everybody should work in service once. Every single person should work in service. If everybody had to wait on tables for a month, it would be a different world. But I don't know about you all, but I was not a very good student. And I think in hindsight, it's just because my brain just didn't work analytically. It's hard to learn out of a book. So there were certain aspects of the business that I had to learn, but I really hated. And this is true of life, of many things. You have to take when you go to college. You have to take classes that you don't want to take, but you got to take them. Well, one of the things I had to do was take inventory. And I loathed inventory. It was a laborious job back in the day. But what I learned was how much food every place that opened their doors threw away every night. I was fascinated by how much food was thrown away. And as you all can probably imagine, any restaurant, anytime you order food, a certain percentage of the cost covers loss, stuff they didn't sell. And this was a different era in America. There was a great sense, right or wrong, of abundance. And it's like, don't worry about it, it's cheap, throw it away, just get more tomorrow. So there was kind of a blithe attitude about food waste. Anyway, it was just a nugget that I learned doing something I didn't like that somehow lodged in the back of my head, and it came into play when my wife and I, my fiance at the time, decided we were gonna, I shouldn't say decided, we were poor, and I didn't realize how much it cost to get married. Yeah, I didn't think churches charged you to get married. I thought they'd welcome me in there, that God would love to see two young people united in love, come on in. It's like, oh no, you gotta pay. And there was a little church down the street in Georgetown that basically was a tiny little church, and the minister there was right around the corner from a nightclub I was working in. And if I may digress, anybody old jazz fans? I grew up in punk rock and rock and roll, loud music. But I wanted to understand what rich people spent their money on. So I went to work in a jazz club. And I was working, did I luck out? Here I was, and again, I went in there just wanting to learn the business. But I worked literally Sarah Vaughan, Modern Jazz Quartet, Ella Fitzgerald. I mean, it was nuts, the people I was able to get to know, because they would play for 4 or 5 days. And what I also was fascinated by, they came in and rehearsed. It was lucky in my other world, it was lucky to get a band to show up sober and sing in key, let alone, but Oscar Peterson would come in and practice his piano every afternoon. Mel Torme would come in, and he loved the movie Spinal Tap. He thought it was the greatest movie he had ever seen in his life, and he would take anybody who wanted to go to a matinee of Spinal Tap. Anyway, there was a little church around the corner, and I went in, and they were offered us, but they said, we'll make you a deal, $50 to get married. And I was like, ka-ching, whatever you need, I'll do. But you got to go out on the food truck and serve people on the streets of DC. It was called the Grate Patrol, Grate, because people slept out on the steam grates in Washington, DC. And I was like everybody. In fact, I should introduce myself and say, hello, my name is Robert. I'm a recovering hypocrite. Because I spent my entire life dreaming of changing the world with music. And yet when I was asked to go out in my own backyard and serve people on the streets of Washington who had been growing exponentially over the course of a couple of years. We went from suddenly a few people you always saw. There's always been people on the fringe. But to see the amount of people who were sleeping outside on the steam grates of Washington, D.C. was very confusing to a young American and to any American, but it was also wild because it was growing exponentially. First, men, then men, women, and then you started seeing families. It was really a big deal. But I was reluctant to go because, like many people, I was afraid. I was like, homeless. I don't know, it sounds okay, but Anyway, we went. And while I was, we pulled up in front of the White House. For those of you who've been to the nation's capital recently, you can't pull up in front of the White House anymore. But for the longest time, it was a street. You could park right in front of the White House. You could pull up into the Capitol and park. So anyway, we pulled up in front of the White House, and it was outside, and this particular night was a rainy night. And so here we were in this warm truck bouncing along Pennsylvania Avenue with cookies and bananas and kind of white bread sandwiches and some lentil soup we had made. Or I didn't make, I was just the volunteer to go out with the truck that night. And we pulled up, and you could see out the window a long line of men and women up around the corner and up on Lafayette Park, right across the street, waiting for this truck. And we pulled up, and it's raining. Not pouring, but it's wet. Slid open the window and started serving people. And very quickly, 2 things happened. And one was not my heart melted at the plight of my fellow humans, but it was the food we had bought that night at the Safeway in Georgetown, the most expensive store on the planet, I think, was well intended, but I'm thinking in the back of my head, wait a second, I remember Our restaurant throws away tons of food. And every restaurant does all over this town, and every university, and every college, all over this town. Events, catered events all night long, all that's food wasted. And this group, with love in their heart, had assembled a nice little spread, but it's like we were throwing away insane, beautiful food. So I was thinking about that. Again, they're spending a lot of money when there's free food over here. But more importantly, I became intrigued because as people went by and had conversations, I couldn't help but notice everybody's wet. I'm up in the warm truck, and they're outside in the rain waiting as they had night after night for the next group of volunteers. And I really realized that this setup, well-intended, love in their hearts, historic, was built more on the redemption of the giver, not the liberation of the receiver. And that really stuck with me. Because again, think about the era that we share, and whether it's the Peace Corps, my good friends here, or all the different things we did that are hearing Dr. King. So many of us heard with our own ears Dr. King speak, or John Lennon, or pick your prophet. So there was a sense of this. I know what they think they're doing, but there's kind of an unfair dynamic that we should challenge. So, with a young man's heart full of love, on the way home, my wife, who was a legal secretary, I was a bartender, neither of us went to college, I started saying, would you write this down? And it's like, if we could pick up the leftover food every night safely, if we found a safe way to do this, we could go to restaurants, hotels, hospitals, caterers, farmers, and pick up all this food, and you could bring it back to a central kitchen where you could make sense of it all. But more importantly, I thought, so many of the men and women I met that night seemed to be much more lucid than my kind of, I won't say bigoted, but stereotyped heart was allowing. I was really impressed by how many great conversations I had. So I said, what we ought to do, though, is why don't we start a cooking school and offer men and women a chance to come in out of the rain and be part of the solution. Instead of just perennial recipients of well-intended charity, they could be part of something bigger, and we could shorten the line by the way we serve it. And then we could say to the restaurants and the hotels, if you give us food, rather than just giving it away to people who you might not be happy are sitting out in front of your establishment, I'll offer people a chance to come in and learn a good skill, good knife skills, basic food sanitation. And after a 12-week, and I couldn't make it that long because many people didn't have that much time to go to a fancy cooking school. So it's just like a little 12-week program. And it wasn't just people off the street. It was people who were going to go through a drug treatment program or were stabilized. But it just kind of flowed out, this idea of, then we could shorten the line by the way we serve it, and we could repay the people who donated food with entry-level people who could help them make more money. Everybody would win. This would be great. So can you imagine how excited I was? And I was actually almost pre-writing my Volunteer of the Year acceptance speech. Only to find every single charity I went to said that'll never work. Every place I went. Now the restaurant folks were thrilled. Restaurant people hate throwing away food. Hate it. It was just, they didn't want to get sued. So it's like, we'll get a refrigerated truck. So again, now it's important to remember, I didn't want to do this. This is really important. I was going to open the greatest nightclub in the world. This was my dream. I'd worked for 10 years. I wasn't going to give it up to start a kitchen, but no one else would. And I understood, and I could sympathize with some of their understandable trepidations. It's against the law. And you still hear this to this day. I'd love to donate food, it's against the law. It's never, ever been against the law. Ever. But more importantly, what was shocking to me, because again, I was just a volunteer, was how many different charities I went to said, Robert, you're a great, nice young guy, but you're naive to think that restaurants and hotels are going to hire people who were addicts or out of prison or who've been homeless. And it's like, you've never worked in a restaurant. Restaurants are islands of misfit toys. Anybody who watched Anthony Bourdain knows restaurants have always been where the square pegs congregate. So this idea of everybody kept saying no, and it's like, I get it. No one's done it before, so you haven't seen it. You can't grasp it yet, but it's not hard. This is really basic. It's food service 101 matched with a sense of a dignified approach to addressing homelessness or the sense of poverty and those who are at the bottom of the rung. So again, as I flash forward, I ended up opening DC Kitchen, thinking, this is going to be an important step. No one's ever done it. We had to make everything up. In fact, it's funny because I went to certain chef associations saying, I really need a curriculum. Can you help me develop something that would enable somebody who's maybe never been in a kitchen to get the basics? 12 weeks, and again, knife skills, food sanitation, work as a team. Those were the three things we were going to focus on. And every chef's association said no. I mean, literally no with kind of a harumph, because we don't want to muddy the idea of what is a chef with this idea of anybody can do it. It's like, come on, dudes, I'm not talking chef. I'm talking about entry-level, good first jobs. Our industry, and you know what was my best friend at the time? The Bureau of Labor Statistics. Well, it's important to have facts when you're trying to sell a new idea. And the idea that there was going to be a 35% increase in food service jobs this was 1988, that there was a predicted increase. So it's like, look, there's going to be millions of jobs available for people. This is smart business. Anyway, Cornell University, when I had already opened, but Cornell University had students coming down because it was the beginning of a movement where students had been asked to do community service to graduate. And so every university had a growing freshman class of students that had done service. And they started organizing service trips. And the students from the hotel school from Cornell came to volunteer. And they said, we need a big project. What can we do? And it's like, can you help me with a curriculum? So they said yes, and that was 1990. The students of Cornell Hotel School developed the very first curriculum for a 12-week job training program, which I dutifully gave away to every single person who ever came to DC Kitchen, because media also exploded. In the 1990s, internet, cable television. And for a person who grew up loving showbiz, I tell you what, it was like shooting fish in a barrel while taking candy from a baby. Every media outlet was thrilled with this idea of like, we can come and follow you around while you pick up food from restaurants, and you can come back and film students in a job training program, and then you can follow the food to its end use. Media loved this, and that spurred a very significant wave of people who wanted to come and learn from DC Kitchen. And it really, at a very early stage, I realized how lucky I was. That here I was in the nation's capital, the capital of the free world, with media outlets everywhere who wanted to follow this. I had a choice. I could do one of two things. I could either absorb all that light, metaphorically, and make it about me and DC Kitchen, or I could realize that I was just lucky to be in the nation's capital, that there were people who were trying to figure out how to open kitchens like ours because they had seen it on TV. But they weren't in DC. They didn't have big foundations that were going to write checks. They didn't have big corporations. They didn't have presidents who were going to come and visit. So I felt an obligation to share every single thing we ever got with those who would never have the same opportunities. So we really, from day one, were open source. Every single thing we had, we gave away to anybody who came and visited. And that was a glorious time. It was a heady time in the 1990s and 2000s. The Clintons came and volunteered. In fact, you want an interesting fact? Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton came the day he was impeached. It was crazy, but it spoke, at least to the man and the couple, that they felt like this would be a great, if they're going to have all the media in the world, they might as well use it for something positive. But so many people came, and this is what gets interesting, because chefs are a lot like I was. They love the idea of not wasting food, and they love the efficiency of the model of what we had developed, and they loved everything. But when I'd say, would you hire a graduate? They'd be like, well, again, I get it, Robert, blah, 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 blah. They just hemmed and hawed. Don't get me wrong, many did, but not at the level I really wanted. So I started saying, let's start having visiting chefs come. And that's when every chef who came to DC wanted to come and volunteer. And a friend of mine called up and said, I got this young Spanish kid who's just come in, and we're opening up a tapas restaurant, and can he come and volunteer? We want to get him into the system here in DC. And it's like, of course, that's what we do. And that's when I met Jose Andres. And Jose was so funny, because he came in and he was delighted. I mean, because we're both very similar. We were like peas and carrots from day one. We just hit it off, because he really loved this idea of how do you, it's like all this food's coming in, how do you squeeze every ounce of opportunity out of it? It's like one thing to make decent meals, and it was always, believe me, it was a great seat of your pants kind of cooking style, guerrilla cooking, we used to call it, because it was that idea of you never knew what you're going to get. And we were serving the biggest shelter in America in exchange for use of the kitchen in that shelter for free. Good business. I didn't have to pay any rent. I had an elaborate, big kitchen. All I had to do was produce 4,000 meals a day for the upstairs and an additional 3,000 meals for the other shelters that we had been serving. So suddenly we were doing 7,000 meals a day, 7 days a week. We've never closed. In fact, one of my great senses of pride, I was talking with Mary earlier about pride, and the difference between accomplishment and pride. But I'm prideful on one thing about DC Kitchen's 37-year legacy. Never closed. 13,514 days. It has never closed. Because that idea of there's always food being thrown away, there's always people who are hungry, there's always volunteers who want to be part of something bigger. Let's see how far we can take this and make it work. So Jose came and just never left. And he went from being, you all know Jose Andres. He's probably at this point, probably the most famous chef in the world at this point. But it's funny, he was just a young dude. He was just a great young friend. And I watched his, and for those, everybody wants to know. I was on Oprah years ago. I was an Oprah angel, which is fun because you get $100,000. Yeah, it's great. Limo takes you to the airport. Have you ever walked through an airport with like busting, wishing somebody would say, "How's your day going?" So you can say, "Dude, I was just on Oprah. I've got $100,000 in my pocket." I was so elated. But people for a long time would ask, "Is Oprah really nice?" And she is, by the way. And you can always tell when the people around that person are nice. And her entire team was really nice. In fact, you want to know an interesting Oprah anecdote? Years later, I got a call from Oprah's people at Harpo Productions saying, "Oprah wants a picture." It's like, okay, whatever Oprah wants, Oprah gets. Why? So Oprah's making a list. A list? What kind of list? Well, it's a list of men Oprah admires. And I'm like, ooh, how many people on the list? Less than 20. It's like, dude, really? I'm on the list of 20 men that Oprah likes? I'll walk the picture over right now. And about 2 months later, I'd forgotten about it. And all of a sudden, my little pager back in the days, and I turned out I was on Oprah's real sexiest man alive list. But it was funny because Oprah's intent was to redefine what is sexy. And for too long, I'd be introduced and people would say, and he's on the Oprah sexiest man list, and everyone would be like, oh, and I'd walk in and they'd be like, huh? But back to Jose. Jose's star started rising exponentially with the advent of the celebrity chef. And Jose was on, because Jose is gregarious and fun, and he cooks fun food, although Alice Waters used to call it carnival food. But whenever he spoke, no matter when he spoke, he'd talk about DC Kitchen and our friendship. And even to this day, almost on a daily basis, I'll get a text from somebody. It's like, dude, Jose's talking about you on stage at like literally, I mean, no matter where he goes, it's a real indicative of the human he is. I bring that up only because, A, we're friends, but it's important because I think people see Jose and they don't realize he is truly a special human. He's a really fascinating man, and he's really smart, and he's done so much. We've really risen together. But it's been a very, very interesting journey. And he came to me at one point, and this is very Jose, because I had literally a mop closet office. We worked in the basement of the biggest shelter in America. It was a beautiful kitchen, but as we grew, I mean, every space was taken up. And I was committed, because our entire mantra was whatever you need is already there. In fact, I would say to anybody who would ask, they'd come and visit, and it's like, I'd really like to open one of these, but you're like, we could never do this in my town. It's like, yes, you can. Every single thing we use exists in your town. All I did was take the food our society threw away, the people our society undervalued, a kitchen that was underutilized, men and women who wanted to come off the street and be part of something bigger than themselves, chefs who had skills and would help teach, but they also had jobs, a generation of young people who had to do volunteer service but wanted to make something happen. It was all there, and it was in every town. All I did, I just came along and took the existing things and moved the pieces around a little bit. That's all I did. But as that model grew, and kitchens started opening up all around the country, and I was dutifully thrilled to help, Jose once came in and sat down in my little mop closet. He goes, I have a new idea. And I'm like, what? What are we going to do now? And he's like, World Central Kitchen. And I'm like, oh, I get this. I get DC and you get the rest of the world. I see how this works. And like so many times, I actually rolled my eyes at Jose. But, you know, because it seems so far-fetched, and I'll tell you more about that. But we did it. And it started out originally, we were going to offer similar job training programs to use food. So we helped open up and social enterprise, businesses too. We were one of the first programs that started developing our own businesses, primarily so we could hire men and women who were coming out of the training program, but who also had felony convictions. And at that era of the computerized application process, if you checked the box that said I was convicted of a felony, you never even got an application. It really bothered me that men and women who had made such Herculean efforts to reestablish themselves were hit with that, you know, dutifully. They were proud of what they had accomplished. So many times people would say, the only thing I ever finished in my life up until now was a prison sentence. Or they'd see their parents, they were almost prodigal children whose parents in the audience, or brothers and sisters, or lovers and friends, would be so thrilled that they finished and they had this sense of purpose, only to be denied an opportunity. So we started our own businesses, not just to hire graduates, and not just to earn our own income, which made us less susceptible to the whims of philanthropy. And not only so to demonstrate that we could pay a good wage, but to say, what a waste to have this many men and women coming home from incarceration only to go back. It costs $75 to $120 per person per year, $120,000 per person in prison. And I mean, we're going back, Deb mentioned school food, the economic stupidity of not feeding our children a meal every day when this is our future. How can you expect to compete in a global economy when your kids aren't well fed? This is just business 101. Similarly, why on earth are we kind of resigned to the idea that once a person's gone to prison, that's where they're going to spend the rest of their life? Let's try something new. And that was really a big part of our business model, to never, ever coast and never be satisfied with, as innovative as what we had done was, we had to innovate again to make sure that we could hire people. So DC Kitchen and then World Central Kitchen both committed to creating businesses that hired people. So we worked in the Dominican Republic to build a bee and honey business for women there. We started a kitchen restaurant in Haiti. And we were doing that kind of work. Zambia, we opened kitchens everywhere that were training kitchens. Then Jose really started going through, we saw both in Puerto Rico, in Haiti first, Houston first, then Haiti, but then Puerto Rico, natural disasters. And that really changed the model. And here's another example. And this, no disrespect. And I never want to be disrespectful to the charities I suggested earlier wouldn't change to adapt to see a new idea. Similarly, when World Central Kitchen started doing disaster relief, the Red Cross, FEMA, World Food Program, their model was, there's a hurricane and it's a disaster. Let's fill up a plane or a truck with food and go there and distribute it. But it's like, from a business perspective, you're basically creating a sluggish recovery because nobody's buying local food. What you have in these situations is restaurants are closed, chefs don't work, farmers can't sell their product. So we immediately said, let's just completely look at this. And our model became, whenever we go anywhere, we go in and we buy local food. We employ local chefs. That's why World Central Kitchen has been so deft and so nimble and is closing in on 500 million meals served. But it's also tough because the times are changing dramatically. And what was first the idea of how can we help people gain a skill, to how can we make sure that neighbors are fed during disasters, to suddenly we decided to go into Ukraine and do meals there during a war. And that's a whole nother thing. And believe me, it caused great conversations at the board level. Are we ready for this? Do we really want to put volunteers or chefs in this kind of harm's way? And we've had many instances, and I'm sure you all know about what happened in Gaza, where beloved teammates lost their lives trying to get food to people. And so a lot of the work now, and I'll kind of wrap this up and open it up if you have any questions. It's been interesting because as a young man, I told you I didn't do very well in school. But I met a person once at a party in DC where as you all know, many of you all have been kind of in DC or in the kind of international circuit, but the parties where you immediately say, what do you do? What do you do? And I met this guy once, he said, I'm a futurist. And I'm like, dude, what's that? And he's like, it's not like Star Trek, it's just probability. And I'm like, what's that? It's like, well, you look at trends and you can't predict the future, but with probability, you can get pretty darn close. And it's like, dude, I'm a futurist. That's what I do. I mean, all my life, it's like, where's the food gonna come from? And who's next to be hungry in America? And this is important because all food, you all have been to pantries and food banks, everything you see represents lost profit. Somebody bought it, somebody grew it, somebody cooked it, they couldn't sell it, they donated it to charity and got a little tax deduction. But their goal, and with every Cornell University, when I first started, there were only 2 cooking schools really in America, Johnson & Wales and Cornell for hotel and restaurant management. That was it. Boom, 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 boom. Suddenly there's thousands of cooking schools in America, and that meant that every year another generation of chefs were going to come out with better science. So it was predictable that the supply of food that seemed so plentiful in my golden youth was going to diminish. And at the same time, every single day in America, this morning, 10,000 people turned 80. Every single day in America, the baby boomers, every single day, 10,000 people turn 80. And there's no plan. And sisters, women outlive men, women outnumber men. Aging in America is a women's issue. This should be the last great, there's so many different issues that are paramount here, but that idea of, okay, the future, less food, more people, primarily women, how do we react? That's a lot of the work we do now, is trying to anticipate where are the real issues that are going to stymie the systems we have developed now. And global warming is really our number one concern. Refugees from the global south who are going to pour north, how do we feed this many people? The last great adventure I went on was I went and opened the LA kitchen. I had been at DC long enough. I felt that, as Keith Richards once so famously sang, walk before they make you run. And I knew that I could not just hold on to being the founder, CEO of DC Kitchen the rest of my life. I had to do something new, and I really wanted a challenge. So I decamped, and my wife and I moved back to where I grew up as a kid in Southern California, because an unending supply of fresh fruits and vegetables, year-round. And the future is what I like to call plant forward. Not vegetarian, not vegan, just smaller animal protein and more different, various proteins, alternate proteins. And I really also realized LA was one of the homes of the largest concentration of older people in America, and what a great place to experiment on what could senior nutrition look like. You know, this idea, and particularly because you have one of the largest concentrations of Armenians, Iranians, South Koreans, which meant you could play with so much flavor. Because if you're going to take from the average American a big piece of meat off their plate, you better replace it with something really interesting. So that idea of flavor was so fascinating to me. And I know I keep saying I'm going to stop, but I'll just a little bit longer. I hate false barriers. And I was traveling once, and have you ever noticed, or I guarantee you will now, virtually everything we get in America is in a 4-compartment tray. Schools, hospitals, prisons, military, no matter where you go, your meal is served in a 4-compartment tray, and the big part is for meat and vegetable starch, and then a drink, milk, whatever. And I became intrigued because I hate false barriers and the idea of the tyranny of this 4-compartment tray. And many of you all have probably been to these modern salad places, sweet greens, tender greens, and bowls fascinate me, the idea of blended meals. So again, that's a lot of the work that I'm still involved with. I love the idea of how do we feed 6 billion people on the earth without continuing to destroy the environment, while also being cognizant, aware, and excited about food as medicine. You know, the idea that we might actually be able to not only address but mitigate and even maybe reverse illnesses like diabetes, hypertension, obesity. What crazy, interesting times. So if you're young, like our intern here, the world is a beautiful place. It might not seem it. It might not seem it, but it's a great time to be curious, daring, audacious, diabolical. And diabolical is a good word, because it makes it fun. Wait till they see what I'm going to do. But it is, because there's so many opportunities to do really powerful work. And that's what still makes me happy to be involved. I am an elder ally now in that I have stepped back. I think it's very important oftentimes for people to stop and say, I have drank deep from the well. It's another generation's turn. I am a servant to a younger generation now and make myself available. But boy, I still love our work. I still love what we do. I still love the challenge and the joy of a kitchen. I still love seeing people eat. And I'm going home to, you know what's interesting? One more thing, and then I'll stop. All these years, I've been doing this work, millions of meals. And I was in this little village where we live in rural New Mexico. And they had a fiesta. And when you move into a little village, you got to be accepted by the little village. And we were anxious to prove our worth because the village has 100 people and a village pig named Snickers. We decided we'd cook for the fiesta. And I had another one of those moments because I had spent decades of my life innovating, thinking, curious, take it apart, put it back together. And I did all this work on the side of how can I get food and make sure it's safe? How can I bring it to a kitchen and train as many people, engage as many people, inspire as many people? How can we produce healthy, beautiful meals? And then how can we produce thousands of them and get them out into the community? But I had relied upon a network of shelters, senior centers, after-school programs, drug treatment programs. And here I was in this scuzzy little village, no dirt roads. And here was the entire village eating together at picnic tables outside. And we're talking about a crazy mishmash. Libertarians, retirees, tweakers, bikers, malcontents, all eating together. And I watched it and it's like, oh my goodness, how did I miss this? The way I distributed that food and the system I relied upon segregated people. Old people, you eat over here. Young people, you eat over here. Prisoners, you eat over there. Or the idea of so many charities say, if you self-identify as poor, come to me and I'll give you a free meal. You know what? There's a deeper hunger in America, and that's the hunger to be included, the hunger to feel like you matter, like your life meant something, like you contributed. And that's what people are really hungry for. And I saw that day that idea of, oh my goodness, how did I miss the opportunity to spend all those years using food to build community? Not just feed people every day, as dignified as we tried to make it, but really say, I don't care how much money you have. I don't care. If you want a meal, if you want to eat next to somebody, come on down. So if I had any advice for any charity right now doing food, it would be community meals, intergenerational community meals. That idea of bringing people together, and they can see so past what might divide us now. If people could spend a little bit more time side by side, whether it's cooking, eating, laughing, or just enjoying the power of community. So thank you all very much for this opportunity to come here.
What did you serve at the fiesta?
You know what? You all probably know this. There's two food cultures in America that mesmerize me. One is basically Louisiana. I mean, you know, Cajun. I mean, it's just a stew of so many flavors. I just find it breathtaking. But New Mexican food is one of my favorites, and it's poor people food. You know, but New Mexico is where the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash from the Pueblos, met the Spanish occupying army's goats, pigs, chickens. There was no domesticated animals, or at least cloven hoofed. And so we ended up serving as we do all the time. In fact, we've done 3 World Central Kitchen activations in New Mexico, once during COVID and twice during fires. But every time, green chili stew, pasoli. Pasoli, the thing I love about New Mexican food is you can feed a village for pennies, literally. Pasoli, potatoes, green chili, and a pork butt, and everybody's happy. And almost like chicken soup, there is something medicinal about that. And not only that, but green chili makes you sweat, which is really good for you. So we've done over 150,000 meals in New Mexico over the couple of years with World Central Kitchen. And get this, the mayor of Santa Fe asked, Robert, would you get something going? And I was looking for a kitchen during COVID. Everything was closed. And so I added the chefs, but where are we going to cook? And I went to the convention center, and God bless them, they were like, no. And I went to the big hotels, no. I went to the community college, and this opened another big doorway because community colleges have culinary programs all across America and beautiful kitchens. and all the students were out because of COVID. So the provost, for lack of a better word, at the college said, yes, but wouldn't it be great if the students could come back and learn from the chefs while you're cooking? That would be great. That would be perfect. It's like, well, let's get the nursing students involved, and they can get credit hours for developing protocols that would keep everybody safe. And well, we can get the greenhouse crew to start growing, because they can grow like Bibb lettuce and stuff very quickly, salad greens. And we ended up opening up the community college, and we produced 55,000 meals during our first run with COVID, with, again, these New Mexican, very affordable meals. But students got credit hours, and so I started opening up and started talking to more community colleges about, you got a generation of young people who the idea of being a famous chef isn't necessarily as exciting now as maybe because they've seen Jose. They're like, I want to be that kind of chef. So we decided, it's like, why don't we start thinking about working with community colleges to develop a nutritional activist kind of track, so that you can actually prepare students so that when the time comes in their future, and they might be faced with a pandemic or an emergency, they know how to work with the health department to produce food in an environment that normally a health department would say no. How do you negotiate and get the ability? Where do you get the propane if you're going to be cooking? If you don't have a kitchen, you got to use propane. Where do you get it? So that idea has really spawned, and that's something I'm very excited about now, is really helping to revolutionize a new curriculum within culinary schools to replace the old European fine dining curriculum with something that emphasizes nutritional activism.
Just one other quick question.
Sure. There's no quick answers with me, but keep going.
Your Marine Corps father, has he blessed your journey?
Yeah, you know what? If my mother was a harder sell. And I love my mother was always a little bit, not dubious. She liked what I was doing. Don't get me wrong. She really appreciated it. But God bless her, it was when I was on Oprah that she started bragging on her son. That's when suddenly her son was like, my son, Yeah, but no, my entire family has been very, and again, today is, yesterday was the anniversary, and DC Kitchen and many other groups, Jose, everybody put out nice comments about the journey that and the movement, I'm hesitant to do this, but the movement that I should be more comfortable saying that I launched. It'd be like Sergeant Shriver. It's like there would be no Peace Corps without Sergeant Shriver. So I'm kind of the Sergeant Shriver of this movement, and it's rare that I would talk like that. But yesterday was one of those days, and my family all lovingly shared with their networks, my big brother, which is always nice.
You talked about how you coordinated those efforts with the community college during COVID. But when you are in a war zone like the Ukraine or in Gaza, how do you negotiate? How do you build those partnerships? How do you work?
Well, you know what's so fascinating about it? It's World Central Kitchen went from being probably a $40 million a year organization to a $500 million a year organization, driven almost 92% with small gifts. People just love Jose and love what he does. And they love the audacity and the kind of commitment that he shows. Now, Jose, one of the wild parts is, believe me, and again, no disrespect, but some of the big food groups and the emergency groups they thought Jose was a celebrity chef trying to get on TV. And so they dismissed him, and they really underestimated what he was about. But Jose, for a while, would film stuff, and somebody lovingly once said, turn the camera around and you talk. You be the person they see. And that's what really, because Jose was so camera friendly. And so that inspired so many people. So huge amounts of money came in, which allowed us to buy a significant amount of foods wherever we went and really be able to build guerrilla kitchens out of nowhere. Tents, big paella pans. Jose loves paella. But an army of volunteers that were willing to go into really dangerous places, oftentimes little parachuting in. Now we're talking about war zones, but even disaster zones where things, potable water, and gangs, there's really tough stuff, but they would be really anxious to be part of that. And that led to a lot of soul searching in the organization of how do we keep people safe from themselves? How do you keep people who want to rush in from rushing in? How do we set up protocols to really do everything we can to ensure people are not really being reckless, or that we are putting them in a reckless situation? And again, we could have never anticipated Gaza. I mean, that was just such a horrid moment, shocking it still remains shocking. And it's never been resolved. No one's ever claimed responsibility for it. Anyway, and you know what's funny is Zomi, who was one of the beloved, probably the most, she was one of everybody's favorites. She was everywhere. She was Australian. And if you ever travel in the world and you're lonely and you hear an Australian accent, go to it. You will have a best friend forever. Australians are a really glorious people, just full of life. I hate to stereotype, but in my experience. But Zomi actually worked with us. She did the activation in Window Rock for the Dene during COVID. So she was out there, and she would come to our house and spend weekends just to kind of get off the res and come in and hang out and just be comfortable for a little bit. So it's still very, very poignant, her loss. But it's funny, like I said, there's so much opportunity and so many people who want to help. And I think what used to be a small group of chefs that would go in, we've really, in effect now, almost jettisoned that idea. And it's now exclusively, how do we hire as many local chefs? And in many places, food trucks. Food trucks are like mammals after the asteroid hit. Food trucks can go anywhere. They're invincible and they're fun. And the opportunity to give the owner of a food truck real opportunity, because we buy the food. And the idea is we'll buy all the food, you sell it, you keep the money. So it was a great way to help rebuild the economy, employ people, buy local foods. One of the more interesting innovations, though, in Ukraine now is what's called, it's not the food train, but they literally have, there's another group that was affiliated with World Central Kitchen, but it's literally an outfitted train that can go out to Poland and other places and stock up and then roar back in and drop meals at every depot it stops in. So again, it's an old cliche, but warfare makes for great innovation. And what we've seen is some very dynamic work. But we have worked hard, and one of the hardest things, I think, for Jose is how much he has tried to influence the government here to embrace, instead of the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Food, and really see food differently than just gas and farmers. We really, whether it's school food, senior meals, there's so many different ways which we could have a much more vigorous food system in America if we invested more heavily in it, and there just hasn't been the interest. And it's one of the only times I've seen him stymied, because he's been able to almost go up over almost anybody who tried to get in his way. One fun anecdote about our friendship, and again, I apologize in advance for the language, but I got a call because whenever somebody's doing a big story on Jose, I'll get a call because they always want to ask, how did Jose go from being a chef to the humanitarian? And I'm the bridge. And I want to tell the story, but I don't want to say the same story over time. So, I've tried to tell it differently. But I said, I've laughed at Jose so many times that he's come in to my office and it's like, here's what we're going to do next. And I'm like, that's crazy. There's no way. And I said, but I've learned my lesson. I don't do that anymore. And I said, in Time, I swear to God, I'm the only guy who got the term fucking A in Time magazine. But I said, if Jose said to me, at this point, if Jose said, we're going to open the intergalactic kitchen, I'd say, fucking A, sign me up, let's go. And the next week, he did food on the space on the space shuttle. He did paella in space. And I'm like, oh my God, I mean, how prophetic.
So a long time ago when I was a kid, we got all our food out of our garden. My mother and father worked the garden and the kids would go out and help. And so later in life, I went back to this little town in Illinois. I wanted to show my daughter our little town that I had grown up in. And we had a tour of the house, and then we went out and back. Let me see your garden. Gone.
Yeah.
Gardens were gone. And so I guess my question is, what's happened to the gardens? And do you see any sign of a resurgence? Or where does our food coming from, since it no longer comes from that little garden back in Illinois?
Well, I'm going to do two things here really quick, because just a little historical footnote that I find fascinating, that I've tried, Joe, I'm not an academic, but I'm intensely curious about things. And I became intrigued by the fact that at the end of World War II, the first time in the history of the world, 10,000 years of modern civilization, the first time ever, an army came back from the war and didn't go back to the farm. That had never, ever happened. Normally, wars were declared, the sons and daughters dutifully went in, and those who survived or limped home went back and they became farmers again. And with the GI Bill, that ended that connection between sinew and soil. And not only that, but metaphorically, they unscrewed the top, metaphorically, of bombs and poured out the ammonium nitrate and created modern fertilizer. And so suddenly you had this interesting confluence of irrigation, transportation, refrigerated trucks, Freon, immigration, and our food system, we left the agriculture. Those two words are oftentimes smushed together. Agriculture is what we were, and we left that. And don't get me wrong, we danced. People danced down the street. Thank you, Jesus, I don't have to be a farmer. Thank you. And the idea, and again, think about it, for thousands of years, the dream of cheap, plentiful food was realized. It was a miracle, the things that we bemoan. Now, in fact, frozen foods was for a grandmother's generation liberation, but there was a cost with that. And it was the fracturing of the agriculture. It was also the beginning of the obesity epidemic and processed foods. One of the groups that I failed to mention that I've done good work here, and I will hold up as an example, is DUG, Denver Urban Gardens. DUG is magnificent. There are, I think, literally 400 gardens throughout Denver. And, what's her name? The founder, not the founder, but the CEO recently is now expanding to help. And there are many cities have gardening efforts like DUG's, but they're hoping to grow that exponentially and help people return to that sense of, at any scale, how can you grow your own food? So there is hope that will be a return, but it is vexing because, again, the conundrum is there's closing in on 7 billion people on the planet. How do we do this? And water, dude, water. I don't know about you all. There's two things that have been really great about this trip is I love tequila. And do any of you all drink tequila? Anybody in this room drink tequila? Okay. There is one brand of tequila that I love. It's Fortaleza. It's a breathtakingly good tequila, but it's very difficult to get anymore. Yet, almost like Jason hunting for the golden fleece, whenever I go to a town and I see a liquor store, it's like, what the hey? Hey, you got any Fortaleza? I went into Golden and they were like, yeah. And I was like, no way. He's like, you can only buy one. We got to spread the wealth. And I'm like, oh my God, you're kidding. I sent a picture home to my wife. I didn't send it to our daughter because she sneaks my Fortaleza when she comes to visit. But I got a bottle of Fortaleza. And I'm going home to a big ass snowstorm in New Mexico. We're supposed to get 8 to 10 inches, which is a good snowstorm. I'm going out in what I call my South 40, quarter acre behind our house. I've tried growing things there, it's just too sandy. But I have now a giant pollinator field. And I'm so excited because I'm going to go home on Friday, I'm going to tote in firewood, but then I'm going to go out in the South 40. And I have sacks of sunflower and variety of wildflowers. And I've got it all figured out. Our neighbor early this year had trash bags of leaves. And it's like, I'll take those. I put them in the back. And on Friday, I'm going to spread my seeds. Then I'm going to put leaves down on top. Then it's going to snow on top of them. And this spring, it won't be that kind of garden, but it will be for the bees, joyful. And I don't know how many of you all have pollinator fields, but there is nothing more joyful than wandering around through the bramble of a thing, surrounded by bees and butterflies and things, without a care in the world that they're going to get stung, that I'm going to get stung. So anyway, thanks for allowing me to riff a little bit on the joys of that I'm about to go back to.
Questions on this side?
You all have been so very kind. You have been a very joyful, engaging, generous audience. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Robert.
Yeah.
Question about global food waste.
Yes.
We know that food decaying in landfills, uncontained landfills, is a huge source of methane emissions.
Yep.
In fact, methane is a much more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Yet in this country, even though we have a fairly well-developed network, it probably can be better, of food pantries, food banks, food kitchens, we're only 5% of the world's population.
Right.
You've traveled all over the world. Are other countries that have a lot of people, India, China, maybe Brazil, countries that have some money, are they addressing the same kind of things that we are in this country with respect to food waste, getting good food to people instead of putting it at landfills?
There's an interesting conundrum. Great question, thank you. There's an interesting conundrum. There's a generation, and I am one, that saw food waste as bad because you could feed people with it, right? And we built, for better or worse, and I rebelled against it, but nonetheless, we built an entire network, food banks, pantries, you named it, that rely on that stream of food so they can dutifully redistribute it. I've been very frustrated throughout my career with the false metric of pounds moved equals impact. You know, many groups will say, we moved this much food, and it's like, that's great, and it is good, but you need to max out the value of it. It's never wrong to feed somebody, but if you make them come back tomorrow for more, that's indentured. You don't want to do that. Now what you have, and this is very interesting because you have a younger generation for whom food waste is environmental degradation. And what they want to do is stop food waste at the top. So whether it's, you know, again, better farming, AI is going to be fascinating on farms. And this is something I've tried to waive, going back to probability. All that wasted food is lost profit. The incentive is to decrease the amount of food that's wasted. And ultimately AI, what you would be fields full of people going along picking what's ripe and what isn't, and maybe gleaners, which is another kind of food rescue thing, coming behind and getting the blemished, the misshapens, the sizes that are all wrong. I made an entire career out of misshapen produce that I could either get donated, oh, seriously, because I could compete for contracts. DC Kitchen does school food to the tune of about 10,000 meals a day for school food in DC, locally sourced food. We went out to Amish and Mennonite farmers and started buying at a reduced price their fair market value but reduced price for their irregulars, which we would just bring to the kitchen and chop and dice. But that reduced price allowed us to be both competitive for a contract and we could pay a better wage. That's it. When that starts to disappear, whether it's different markets, nowadays with so many younger people, they want to buy that food and convert it into something that will be sellable, save the planet and buy this juice, buy this retail product. So there's a lot of competition now for the food that this network of food anti-hunger groups rely upon. They, in my opinion, wasted almost 30 years of opportunity to innovate in the vainglorious pursuit of feeding the poor. That food's going to be gone soon. Whether it's a younger generation who is working with science and different inventory controls and AI, which will come along and literally spray pesticide individually where it's needed, pick things as it's ripe without the need for manual labor. There's a lot of change coming, and there's going to be some unintended consequences. That's one of the things that I'm fascinated by also is innovation is fun, and we're seeing it with AI. Yay, 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 unintended consequences. What happens when millions of people don't work anymore? And you know, every innovation has been to give us more free time. Americans still, we don't know what to do with free time, you know? Anyway, but around the world, Italy was the first. Italy and France, somewhere between them, that, I don't want to say outlaw, but legislate that you can't throw away food anymore, that you really got to redirect that food. So there have been attempts to legislate, and they did it in California, but oftentimes what you find is progressive legislatures love passing innovative new laws, but they don't want to put any money to actually create the infrastructure needed to collect food. Composting is a classic example. There should be, in fact, one of the, if you ever get to Burlington, Vermont, and Ben & Jerry's had a lot to do with this. They put money into what was called the intervale system. And the idea was they were going to try and grow, Phil, back to your point, they were going to try and grow 5% of their own food within the city limits of Burlington, Vermont. An audacious idea. And they created major composting there. And they actually took the steam that was coming out of a big plant like the Coors thing. They redirected the steam into greenhouses that you could rent for free if you were a resident of Burlington to grow your own food. So there's been examples of this, but the amount of money that needs to be redirected into the infrastructure it takes to compost, to recycle food, all those things, is still lagging.
Better management of food waste is actually a much bigger opportunity with respect to climate change than electric vehicles.
Agreed. No, it is fascinating because, to your point, for a younger generation, it is all about greenhouse gases. So it's going to be very interesting. And it's one of the reasons I like being an elder ally. Instead of still trying to think I've got the answer, it's like, let me just be a servant to your quest. You know, how can I tend your donkey, Don Quixote, while you go chase the windmill now? But it's fun to see young people so curious about science and the desperate need to innovate when it comes to greenhouse gases and global warming. But dude, water is the issue. This is profound. You still go in Southern California near Yuma, and you still see fields of alfalfa and soybeans, big sprinklers that evaporates before it hits. I don't understand how we approach our water system like we do.
We've
Thank
got
you.
another
Thank you.
question on this side.
You all are great. Thank you so much. It's really a joy to talk or have a conversation.
In light of the Trump administration's disemboweling of USAID, what are organizations like World Central Kitchen, International Rescue Committee, AmeriCares, and these other large global aid agencies doing to try to fill in the food gap for these other countries that are not benefiting from USAID anymore?
You know, it's very difficult these days to avoid politics in our discussions, and I always want to be respectful, but it is disastrous what's happening. Now, not only with the cuts, but as we're seeing with things like Corporation for National Broadcasting, they are strangling the cash flow. So not only are they cutting off all the grants, they're closing down agencies, but they're cutting grants to the nonprofits that would normally, theoretically, come to the rescue. Now, historically in my career, I've watched red states cut things, and the governor will dutifully say, whenever asked, the charities will cover this. Now, a lot of my career has also been, and I'm going to digress, but this might be interesting, that I'm fascinated by the role of nonprofits in America. I was on a board of WETA with Ken Burns, and I would constantly pester Ken Burns to do a documentary on nonprofits in America. It's one of the most unique things de Tocqueville marveled at our associations and all the things. Nonprofits are the third biggest employer in America. Third biggest employer. That's may or may not be a good thing, but it is. And sisters, it is the feminized part of the American economy, because 75% of nonprofits are founded by, led by, and volunteer driven by women. And that, to me, my way of thinking, has always been indicative of the rules that have governed how nonprofits function. We have to rattle a cup to get funding. And in my opinion, and if I say anything tonight that you can take to the bank, it's this economic principle. There is no profits without nonprofits. You can't have a town. No place functions. No one will move to. No corporation will invest in a company in a town without arts and culture, communities and faith, education, healthcare, clean air, clean water. It's impossible. Yet nonprofits still have to go out and say, can I have a little bit of the profits that we enabled you to make through our hard work? More importantly, and more divisive, nonprofits have no political rights. I used to lament and be quite vocal. I love making our own money because I could be vocal. But the fact that a dry cleaner across the street from DC Kitchen could put up a vote for sign in their window. But if somebody came in and said, Robert, you've been doing this for 25 years, what candidate do you think would have the best opportunity to diminish the demand for charities? If I said, well, here's the candidate I'd vote for, my 501c3 could be taken away because I talked about a candidate. I think that is sexist to its core and should be fought. I think nonprofits merit and deserve every equal opportunity to be participants in the American democratic system, but we haven't been. And because of that, at this very moment when our funding is being cut and more cynical politicians say charities will cover, we don't have the opportunity or the power to challenge that, because most charities right now are terrified that if they speak out, they'll lose any possible money they might get. So the nonprofit sector, which has always struggled, in fact, one of the reasons I'm here tonight is I had the luck of being in Washington, D.C. at the right time in the right place. And quite honestly, to take it one step further, I'm a white dude in America. And so I was able to raise money and had the rarest of opportunities to think, because I had enough money that I didn't have to sweat payroll all the time. Now make no mistake, I sweated plenty of payrolls. And I never missed a payroll for 30 years. But the pickle we're in, because there's the idea that individual people in America can fund what was taken away by USAID or any of these things is a fool's errand. And I really do, I ache and worry about the nonprofit sector and what we're going to do to counter this, because we have I spent probably 13 years of my career talking about nonprofit political rights, and nonprofits were terrified they'd get in trouble. Much as women. Do you realize, and far be it from an old white dude to talk about feminist history, but in between Seneca Falls Convention, where the first time women and leaders like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth came together to talk about abolition and suffrage, from that date in 1848 to 1920, when they got the 19th Amendment, which only gave white women the right to vote, 72 years. 72 years. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all these other suffragettes fought tooth and nail. They didn't fight men. They had to fight other women. They had to convince other women they had those rights and get them to rise up. That was the hard journey. And I think similarly, the same thing stands for nonprofits today. They have been told, just as women, they have been told they can't for so long they think they shouldn't. And I think that's a sad predicament we're in, because I don't know, my friend, whether we have the tools required to make up for the shortfalls that are happening right now. It's a very dark time, I have to admit. It's a very dark time.
Another question over on the far side there.
And I hope I'm answering questions close to.
It's a big question.
It is. It is. And I'm just a nightclub dude, so sometimes at the end of the day.
Thank you so much. So I'm working in the nonprofit community now here in Colorado, and I think just to piggyback on that, besides the concerns of federal government funding, is that Colorado has a $1 billion shortfall. So I guess what I wanted to say is you seem like a very hopeful person, and I love that, and I think that's what we need right now. But how do we come at that in the nonprofit community where it feels like there's this scarcity mindset and everybody's fighting over the same money and you're all doing good work and you want everybody to thrive, but you're sort of like, but I really want my organization to keep going. So what in this particular time would you encourage nonprofits to be thinking about to be hopeful and innovative when it feels like that scarcity space?
Well, I love talking history, and I'm going to reverse flow here and talk directly to that, and then we'll go back to history. But Colorado, in my experience, has had a great nonprofit association here. Rennie, I can't remember Rennie's last name, but he ran it forever, and he's a great dude. And I did many speeches here about this nonprofit unity. And I was flummoxed that Mayor Hickenlooper, when he ran for governor, I was convinced, because I was desperate to find a candidate who would talk openly about the role nonprofits played in the economy. Again, nonprofits are major sources of outside investment dollars coming in. The last question, that oftentimes that was federal grants, but nonetheless, major sources. And how mayors could talk about elect me when they couldn't answer a question. How many nonprofits in this town? How much money do they bring into this town? How much payroll taxes do they pay? It's like nobody. I had never met a mayor anywhere in America who could answer that question. And it shocked me that you could expect to elect. Why would I elect you if you don't even know about the basic economics of your town? And that still vexes me. And I thought Hickenlooper would take the Office of Strategic Partnerships to the state level. And he didn't. And I was always vexed and confused. What? And no one's been able to explain it. I think there was some political intrigue, not to get into Colorado politics. But it's still there. that potential is still there. And as much as I beat my head, literally 13 years of my life, I traveled America, nonprofit unity. I was like Carrie Nation. I was like 1,000 different union organizers. You know what's funny though, when you read about liberation movements, Gandhi marched down to the port city of Dundee, and the British had been in control of India for 200 years. And he marched down, and everybody was waiting, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? And he had promised, I'm going to walk 26 days. And he was like 73. And the dude kicked out 24 miles a day, barefoot, walking. And every day, media around the world got more and more excited. What's he going to do? What's he going to do? He walked down to the beach and picked up a handful of salt. It was illegal for an Indian in a country, subcontinent, surrounded by water, to make or sell salt. They had to buy salt imported from England. And it was against the law in their own country. And Gandhi picked it up and he held it out. And people were like, what? And he's like, we see Indians, we see Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, and fight each other. You know, we see North versus South. We see caste. The British don't see that. They see servants. And this salt is a symbolism. We are united. In this climate, you cannot survive without salt. This is a symbol of our combined subjugation. And even though salt only costed rupees, pennies to buy, 350 million people, that adds up pretty fast. The British minimized it. But it eventually led, not exclusively, but a big part of that unifying sense of let us move past what has divided us and find common cause in kicking the British out. Dr. King took the dimes it took to ride a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. It only cost a thin dime. And just as the British mocked Gandhi's use of salt, the town power of Montgomery scoffed. A bus boycott? You're going to fight racism in the South with the dimes it takes to ride a bus? A dime times all those people. And the commitment to whatever it takes. They started taxi cabs to ride each other. The town council eliminated taxi cabs without a license, and there were no licenses being, so they walked. But that idea of unity, if we do this together, Cesar Chavez used table grapes, a simple table grape, to go up against land ownership in California. As bizarre as that sounds, we're going to fight centuries of land grants and land ownership with grapes. It worked because they stood together. This is my rallying cry, and I hope, sister, that you will take it. And maybe, and I'll talk with you whenever you want, and Lord help me, I don't want to go back and try and do this again, but this conversation and others inspire me by this idea of the nonprofit sector is one of the greatest untapped sources of innovation, creativity, caring, commitment to community, dynamism, and money and employment. The amount of money we put into payroll taxes, people think nonprofits don't pay taxes. Oh yes, we do. Anybody who makes payroll knows you're paying taxes. So that opportunity for nonprofits to find common cause and again, set out to elect a generation of people who don't see .com and .org and think erroneously .coms drive our economy. We need a new stadium. We need a new mall. We need a new this. They don't see that nonprofits represent a tremendous opportunity. I mentioned that DC Kitchen has a contract to do school food. Imagine electing a generation of mayors who said to the nonprofit sector, I need a bunch of you all to start creating jobs. How about if we look at the procurement process in which our city, our county, our state gives away contracts, and we change the contract to really give social enterprises, nonprofits that are going to buy local, pay a good wage, and reinvest profit. Profit will never leave Colorado because our very culture is to reinvest it. If I'm a mayor, sign me up. Sign me up. The problem is what you have is a generation of politicians, understandably, who have a bifurcated sense of the economy. Charities do good deeds and they don't pay taxes. And again, I find that insane that a whole generation of politicians don't understand basic economics of what we do, but it's our job to tell them. So I would challenge you, I'm sorry, what's your name? Julie. I would challenge you, Julie, and hopefully inspire you to maybe talk with some friends and say, you know, why don't we, when there's a mayor's race, why don't we have a debate that we as the nonprofits of Golden, of Denver, of Colorado, challenge them. You know, we want to talk to you. There should not be, for example, and I'm going to go back to our original thing, I don't think there should be an election in America in which food policy is not openly debated. How can you possibly elect people who won't talk to you about how are we going to feed these elders? And not just feed them, but include them. You know, how are we going to feed our kids? Where's the food going to come from? You know, these are real. Where's the water? Where's the idea of food waste and environmental and methane gases? How can we elect people anymore that don't have a really detailed food policy? So that idea of, I think, nonprofits and their allies should start to hold more debates, but also, frankly, set out to find and then elect people who show up on day one understanding. Our model has been historically, when somebody gets elected, we march down to educate the new mayor. I want to elect somebody who's already educated, who shows up on day one saying, social enterprise, dude, I'm ready, let's rock. That's the opportunity we have, but we have to take our future into our own hands. As Joe Strummer from The Clash said, we got to grab the future by the face. So Julie, I'll work with you if you want.
So that speaks to what we could do locally. But with the loss of USAID and other global organizations, we know that starvation, death from hunger around the world is a real thing. Growing up in the 60s, I was told to finish what was on my plate because there were kids starving in China. I eliminated food waste just like I was told. But that didn't do much for the kids in China. So from a world perspective.
But it raised a generation of people who understood that there were kids in China and we could do something about it.
From a global perspective, as a World Affairs Council, what would be the advice to this group of what can we do about death from hunger and starvation around the world?
Well, you know, again, I'm buoyed by the university system. And in particular, I'm a big fan of the land grant system in America. Not to go back to history, but land grant universities are one of the best things we ever did in this country. The idea that we were going to educate the sons and daughters of farmers versus the children of the elite was radical. John Morrell from Vermont was the congressman who did it right after the Civil War. And it was breathtaking. And I think land grants, and particularly the ag schools, and get this, the ag schools, which shrunk tiny, they were the basis of virtually every big land grant university, was the ag school. They're now in the corner, but there is a lot more dynamism because a generation of young people want to study, whether it's because they want to garden, or whether it's because they want to see less methane, or it's because they want to feed people around the world and they're really worried about how do we feed 6 billion people with water and all these other issues. They're coming in, and the land grants and many universities and the ag departments are really becoming vibrant laboratories. So that's one aspect, because I think there's going to be great experimentation in food and what does nutrition of the future look like? And more importantly, what does portion look like? Americans are burdened by the idea of expectation of a portion size, which is astronomically bad for us. You know, the land grants were charged at the World War I. The Lusitania sank, and suddenly there was a draft. And they realized, oh my God, all these sons and daughters of farmers are spindly, and they're prone to rickets and pneumonia and death. You could die. Diarrhea, you died. You got pneumonia, you died. And so they turned to the land grants and said, we need 20 pounds in 20 years. 20 pounds to the frame and 20 years to the life of the average human. And by 1940, they had done it. And so when World War II happened, there was a much sturdier, sadly, cannon fodder, but nonetheless, strapping young people who could go to work, and they were physically able. Flash forward another 40 years, we had added 40 pounds, and we're starting to subtract the lifespan. No, it's bizarre. It was like one of the most amazing feats. Our food system in America was the dream of 1,000 cultures. Yet it became our kind of, I don't know what the right analogy would be, but it's killing us. So there is all kinds of intense curiosity. And you know what's even more interesting? This is not even close to what you're talking. It's almost a grotesque analogy, but I'm mesmerized by weight loss drugs. These weight loss drugs are miracles. Because if you think about the public health care cost of obesity, diabetes, and hypertension, so much of that driven by weight. Imagine, and more importantly, the emotional toll that people carry when they don't think they look good or they feel not beautiful. And I hate the beauty myth, but you get my point. There's so many different things that are happening. But dude, I don't know. I really don't. I mean, it's almost like homelessness. If someone asked me right now, if somebody came along and said, stood up right now in the audience and said, Robert, I got $50 bazillion And I'll give you all of it. How do you solve homelessness? I'd really be vexed, because I grew up in an era where homelessness was driven by, obviously, economics, but a lot of it was driven by the end of the mental health system in America, with the Mental Health Act, where we pretty much closed all the mental health hospitals, but then alcohol and drugs. And when I started DC Kitchen, I had to figure out a job training program that would deal with men and women who were coming out of heroin and alcohol. And we could do that. Then came crack, and was a different puzzle, but we were able to figure out how to get somebody clean and sober, metaphorically, from crack addiction. Meth and now fentanyl, I wouldn't know what to do. It's so, and this is sadly, and I don't want to be a defeatist, but the issue with USAID and the epic reality of, and I think it's been downplayed and actually hidden, the carnage and the death that's happening. I think the numbers are so frighteningly high. And the fact that Elon Musk walks free, but that's a whole nother discussion. But it can be demoralizing, and almost, there are times when I feel like my retirement, even though I'm still active, but I feel like I'm hiding. I'm being very honest. I feel like I've stopped, and I'm like, wow, I've had a long career. It's another generation's time. It's like, no, dude, get the fuck back out there and fight. I feel like I should be doing something more. And I think Julie's going to sucker me into something, I can tell. But no, because it can be. It can be. I think a lot of Americans now are, and globally, I think a lot of people around the world are so, like, almost frozen in their tracks with a sense of, what do we do? How do we counter this? There is a moment, I think sometimes the darkest before the dawn, where it seems so impossible and so unrelenting, and then something happens, whether it's an individual, whether it's a movement, whether it's a new idea, that somehow it breaks it open. I'd like to think it'll be the midterm elections. I feel safer talking now that, I wasn't the first one to say it, so I feel like it's a little bit easier. But I'd like to think that we can regain some sense of purpose in our country. I mean, we're not this is not who we are. And I'd like to think we can find our way back to the garden, I always say 10,000 people a day turn 80. And for so many of them, they look in the mirror. It's a wonder you can't put your head out the window in the morning and hear a sigh. As 10,000 people look in the mirror and say, how did I get so lost? I was part of the richest, freest, most educated generation in the history of the world, and we had the best soundtrack ever. How did I get so tricked into thinking if I just bought more stuff, I'd be happier? And there's an army of them turning to the nonprofits, to volunteerism, saying, use me, show me where to go. And too often we'd say, well, come down and help us sort cans, when we should be saying, help us get political, help us organize, help us do something to take back control of this glorious country and our vast potential, if we kind of return to an era where we saw each other as neighbors and not adversaries. And that would be my hope.
Nice. Les? Sorry. I just really think that you should make AARP interview you and be a person on the AARP magazine, because I do get it. And that would be a really good and inspiring thing for them to put in their magazine.
It's funny. I did great work with AARP. They gave me the first $1 million check they've ever given anybody to open the LA kitchen. But it's tough. I mean, during the pandemic, the majority of people who died were people over 65. And even more damning, and Julie, I'm going to go back to you. I'm not picking on you or anything, but just you're my food person in here. But the food movement, the majority, 600,000 Americans died. No, I'm sorry, 1 million. 60%, 600,000 died primarily of comorbidities associated with bad nutrition. And the charitable movement has a role in that. We've been pushing junk food that was donated from companies down on the poor to claim poundage, and we fought hunger. And we're responsible for some of that. And I think we need to own and repent and have a nutritional line in the sand. We will not ever distribute junk food ever again, even if we have to re-educate our donors to understand that less poundage has a better outcome than more. But that idea, though, I didn't hear AARP talk during the pandemic. They should have been turning over chairs and breaking windows, throwing rocks at the Capitol because of the amount of elders who were dying alone in isolation. But they didn't hear a peep. And I worry that AARP, like no disrespect, food banks, there's an era where their time is past. And I don't know what the next generation, but there's an army of older people in America. And I started saying, we can't go back to the garden, but we can become gardeners again. And that idea, though, of how do you challenge an older generation and a younger generation, this younger generation coming up, 100 million strong, they've been raised to a person literally doing service. Every single kid had to do service to graduate high school, literally, which means the most technologically advanced, and not sound like an old dude, but they have a global language in hip hop. So this is a global group that for whom they don't have the option of writing a check at the end of your to charity. The only charity they have, the only option they have for philanthropy is the way they make their money, or the way they spend their money. And this is where a new generation of social enterprises could be really profound. And it hasn't been recognized yet. A lot of people have been counting on the idea of a generation of consumers who will say, not with my money. Hey, capitalism, you can do what you want. You can pay your CEO this much money. I'm not going to buy your product. That's power. And that's what, if I could write another book, it would be called Grapes, Dimes, and Salt. And it would be the story of how 3 different leaders with 3 different challenges used these simple little things to inspire unity. And they basically said if poor people don't spend their pennies, the power is revealed. And it's always been with everyday people. Patti Smith closes every show she does with people have the power. Man, I love Patti Smith. I'm fascinated by her. She's out there rocking. She's like 79 and she is rocking every night. So anyway, I would love to see AARP or another version of that really help inspire an older generation, because I worry that a generation have really been poisoned by news. And I think you're seeing an older generation that is so fearful that somebody's going to come and take what they worked hard to get.
Third act.
Yeah, yep. And there's a whole new movement on that right now, the third act.
Do you think it would be beneficial if more people became vegetarians for the future?
Yeah, totally. It would be fantastic. And again, this is why when I started doing senior meals in LA, the idea wasn't to be a nutritional imperialist and tell people what to eat. In fact, we did so many experiments with grains, quinoa, farro, all this stuff. And I used to say, what do ancient Israelites have in common with modern old people in America? They hate farro. But that idea, though, we started playing with what we call plant forward. The idea of how do you shrink? We used to call it cosmetic protein. Put 1 or 2 pieces of a flank steak on top of a big salad, and then put some alternate proteins. I'm so fascinated by alternate proteins, and this is science. The idea of things that are easier for elders to digest, and you can get so much more nutritional bang for the buck out of a smaller amount. But how do you disguise that? Again, just as I wanted to do in my nightclub. How do you make a bowl a nightclub? How do you disguise all the things that would be healthier with 2 pieces of chicken, 2 pieces of shrimp, something on the top to get the carnivore over their sense of, I don't want to eat that. And that's a big barrier. That's a huge barrier. Actually, what's funny is we wanted to partner with the Rams, which were moving from San Diego, I think, up to LA. And it was funny because what you were seeing on professional and college level athletics was a growing number of vegan and vegetarian athletes and an explosion of coaches, staff that would be, their job was to say to the big burly middle linebacker, it's like, okay, what do you like? What's your food you like? Big Macs? Okay, I get it, Big Macs, yay. Let's make you a healthier version of a Big Mac and help you kind of get a better diet. Understanding that you want a Big Mac. But that idea, we were trying to enlist a lot of different people to help us sell the idea. Another subject really quick. One of the reasons I went to LA, there's so many different reasons I went to LA, but I call it the Frances McDormand moment. Frances McDormand is a brilliant actor, but she's one of the few women actors in Hollywood that had the temerity to say, I'm not changing anything. This is who I am. Take me as I am. I'm a pro. I'm the best you're going to get, but this is what you're going to get. And you could predict probability that with Netflix, with a lot of these different new media outlets, there were going to be more and more parts, which meant that there was going to be a growing number of older actors on the cover of AARP magazine, which was part of my pitch to AARP, who would talk about how their diet and their health or their spirituality or their exercise took the place of a generation of cosmetic surgery, no disrespect. And that was going to be a great way to help sell a generation on a new diet that might be vegetarian or vegan or plant forward. So there's so many different ideas about what we need to do, but I think we have to remember that we have to be salespeople. When I graduated high school, my pop came up to me with one of those looks, and it's like, oh, the dude's going to try and impart some wisdom. And he pulled me aside, and he's like, son, you should really be a salesman. You love to talk. You're gregarious. You should be a salesman. And I'm like, what did I ever do to you? Why would you say that to me? Why? What? You know, but I am a salesman. I really am. I'm a great salesman. We need more people willing to sell and recognize that if the customers aren't buying your product, it's not the customer's fault, it's your fault. Think about the pitch. How are we selling our product? So to many different points, we need to drastically change our food, the way we grow it, a lot of things. But we have to sell it. And what you're seeing now, don't you find it amazing that Michelle Obama must every morning wake up and say, God, I talked about school food 10 years ago and they called me a food Nazi. And they do all this stuff, and now suddenly, you know, we're going to change, God bless Robert Kennedy Jr. And some of his ideas about food aren't bad. I mean, it'd be great to see better food in school. But that idea of selling it and really making it you know, something that we can help. When we started doing school food in DC, and I did in LA, we had a senior tasting squad. Same thing. What do you like? How can we make it healthier? We're making 20 meals today. Come in and help test the meals. Which ones do you like? And then I could go to the Department of Aging, who'd be like, no. And it's like, I've been to our senior tasting squad. I got 30 seniors from all walks of life of LA. This is what they want. So again, it's the idea of how do you give people a chance to be part of designing and understanding these menus.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.